Start the truck. Start the truck, Dex!
Frank!
Seatbelt.
We are talking about the movie Bloodfest. This one is written and directed by Owen Egerton, who also has a role in the movie. Now this movie, if it wasn't for the film Cabin in the Woods, would probably be considered somewhat of a classic, I would say, in future horror conversations. But we do have Cabin in the Woods. So let me explain what this film is about. It focuses mainly on this kind of like young teenage boy who is a massive horror fan, and his mother was killed by a home invader some years previously. And there is this massive kind of horror festival that is coming to his town, and he and a few friends want to go in there basically and obviously, you know, do what you do in a festival, I guess. However, the proprietor of this festival has got other plans, and he actually intends to make his own horror film by literally killing all of the people who come into this festival with all his kind of like cronies, and make the kind of, you know, his horror film ultimately. There's a couple of twists along the way, so obviously I won't give away here. Suffice to say, this movie is kind of like homaging of many different kind of like kind of horror movies that we've kind of seen along the way. Zombie films, it's, you know, it's Saw, The Nun, all sorts of stuff. There's loads of kind of like little nods and winks here, and obviously sort of knowing nods and winks to also the kind of the horror movie tropes that we've sort of seen. And we have our sort of our group of friends ultimately kind of having to go through almost like a theme park, all these different kind of like worlds, if you like, of different kind of horror themes to try and kind of find an escape. So what do we think of the movie? This is actually quite a hard film to review because it's a lot of fun. This movie is a lot of fun, but it's not as clever, I don't think, as it thinks it is. And I'll kind of go into it a bit, but let's talk about what works. Yeah, and there's lots to be had here. There's loads of different kind of sections that are all kind of lots of fun. It's very gory, you know, huge body count, and a variety of different kind of ways people get offed. And you know, it's the whole sort of, it's very much a tongue-in-cheek film. I mean, you know, and I will bear that in mind when I come on to the critiques. But you know, it's definitely a fast-paced movie. It kind of just rattles through. There's absolutely loads of stuff going on. You've got a few familiar faces here. Heading up cast, you've got Zachary Levi, who actually plays himself as a kind of guest at the HorrorCon, but he's only in one scene. You've also got the guy who was in The Amazing Spider-Man as Ned Leeds, I forget the actor's name, and also a girl I recognise from Falling Skies. You know, so the cast do an okay job here. I think the makeup effects are all pretty good. You know, if you're a horror fan, this is obviously made for horror fans. There is a lot to enjoy here, and you enjoy kind of like picking out all these kind of all these different references. And this might be a nice kind of like marathon to do this, you know, Bloodfest, Scream, and Cabin in the Woods. It's maybe a, you know, a meta horror marathon. But what doesn't work? Well, it's not as clever as I think it thinks it is, like I've mentioned. So the thing is with like Cabin in the Woods, now this might take a little bit of explaining, so bear with me. That was certainly more of an outlandish film in the fact that we had various kind of monsters and kind of supernatural creatures. But it makes sense in the rules that it set out. This movie is very much about following horror movie rules, but it actually doesn't then follow them. For example, I mean, this movie, there's no supernatural stuff. It's all people who are, you know, killers in their own right, dressed up as variety of different kind of like, you know, vampires or serial killers and stuff like that. But it doesn't make sense because, like, for example, we have a guy who is dressed up at this notorious serial killer. He's obviously made for this film, but he's meant to be a Jason or a kind of like a Freddy or whatever. And he's kind of defeated by someone kind of talking about his father and his backstory, but this is not the real killer. This is just someone playing the part, if that makes sense. So it doesn't make sense that this person would be affected by that and stuff like that. And then we have, it goes maybe a little bit too silly, because we have these zombies, and they're not real zombies, but they are automatically controlled corpses. So these are corpses that have been wired up, and people are controlling them with joysticks and stuff like that. So it's a little silly, but it just doesn't, you're still sort of shooting them with a kind of like, oh, we need to shoot them in the head. Well, no, because they're not real zombies. They don't work like that. So it sets up all these rules and then kind of ignores them to a certain degree. Certainly in some, and it's very much like, oh yeah, you mustn't have sex and stuff like that. All the kind of the obvious ones that we all know. But I feel it then sets up its own rules, but then kind of breaks the sort of continuity. Now, like I said, this doesn't take itself too seriously, and on one hand, you can just kind of enjoy it for what it is, but just not think about it too much, because if you do, then it'll just unravel. And mass killing on this scale is going to bring, police and stuff like that, and you wouldn't have this festival without any sort of police presence anywhere nearby and things like that, and so yeah, you can kind of chalk it up to just a lot of fun, but just don't think too much about it. I just don't think it doesn't kind of like hold up with the logic that sort of sets up Scream or Cabin in the Woods, even though Cabin in the Woods, which is its nearest cousin here, is a more outlandish. It makes sense within its own universe, whilst this one doesn't quite as much. We have people kind of flying at this kind of like this truck at the end, and they're just people. Anyway, so it gets a little bit kind of like samey, is what I have to say. It's just a variety of people with different kind of like styles of makeup, and I'm thinking, okay, so if these are all just actors or people who are just playing the part of ghosts, why are they just kind of like acting like a real ghost and that floating around and stuff? It doesn't make sense. Maybe I thought about that too much, I just don't know, but it just seemed to kind of like fall apart a little bit for me. I also don't think our lead character is quite as strong and a kind of as an interesting leading man. He comes across as a little bit of a weak leading character, if you ask me. And it does its own, again, it kind of falls into the trap of being its own cliche. And like, one of the cliches I always think, if someone is in a couple and then one person in that couple dies, you're guaranteed the corresponding person is going to die. And if you are the in a couple that survives, the both of you are going to survive. There's maybe horror tropes that aren't talked about as much. It just kind of falls straight into them. But it is a lot of fun. There's lots of gooey mess here, lots of kind of like gory effects, lots of people getting killed and maimed in different ways, although I was a little bit perplexed that there wasn't any other survivors around. I mean, there's hundreds of people at this festival, and we see a load get kind of like killed off at the beginning, but then there seems to be no one else around. And it struck me as a little odd that the only public that we see are our survivors. And it's like all of these people are meant to be in all these different kind of like, they've built all of these kind of different worlds with clowns and zombies and stuff, yet our group of 4 people are the only ones to be kind of going in there. It would have been better if you asked me to have other people around as well, getting killed and maimed by all these different kind of worlds, rather than just the kind of the big massacre that sort of happens at the beginning. But that's a great scene, I will say that. It's kind of like scene where we have the kind of the guy on stage, and he's like these kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre guys, chopping up all the crowd. It's a great scene. So it's a lot of fun, but I just don't think it's the classic that it maybe could have been. And I think maybe if we didn't already have Cabin in the Woods, which this is clearly obviously influenced by, because we have the people in the control room and doing all of this, then maybe I feel maybe it may stick into people's minds a little more. Because we already have that and it was done better, I just don't think it's going to be remembered. But it's worth a watch, I would say. Generally speaking, if you are a horror fan, I would recommend this film, because I feel it's a lot of fun and you'll get a lot out of it, despite the fact that, it's maybe a little bit silly at times and, doesn't kind of stick to its own kind of mythology. But I'll give it a 6 out of 10, which is an above average review for me. You know, and I would say if you are a horror fan, there's going to be at least aspects of this film that you'll enjoy. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to you next time. Bye for now.